Researchers extracted DNA from bones found in Russia to learn more about how their communities were organized. Researchers extracted DNA from bones found in Russia to learn more about how their communities were organized. One of the things that makes us special as a species is our ability to form communities. But we humans were not always alone in this. A new study sheds light on how Neanderthals formed their own clans. Neanderthals are distant cousins of humans who lived 430,000 to 40,000 years ago. They have a bad reputation as cave-dwelling thugs with clubs, but Lorit Skov, a paleogeneticist at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology in Leipzig, Germany, says you really have to get that image out of your head. You know, this image of Neanderthals being brutes is not quite accurate, he says. The more we learn about them, the more like humans they appear to be. This human connection is further strengthened by the latest findings from Skov and his colleagues, published this week in the journal Nature. The group examined genetic material from the bones and teeth of Neanderthals from 2 caves in central Russia. The inhabitants of the caves are believed to have lived around 55,000 years ago. They extracted the DNA by drilling tiny holes in the ancient remains. It was a delicate operation. One drop of my sweat would outweigh the Neanderthal DNA molecules 1,000,000 to 1 or something like that, so you've got to be really careful, says Skov. And it didn't always work. Sometimes the DNA could not be found, sometimes a bone was chewed and contaminated by a prehistoric hyena. But Skov and his colleagues were eventually able to extract the genetic codes of 13 Neanderthals who lived in the cave, including several who were related. A father and his teenage daughter and a boy around the age of 10 who was related to a woman in the cave. This second-degree relationship is a bit fuzzier, says Skov. They could for instance be cousins, they could be grandparent/grandchild, they could be aunt/nephew, all those kinds of things. It's the first time Neanderthal relatives have been sequenced side by side. Skov says the DNA of the individuals living in the cave also provides some clues as to how society might be organized. In other words, Neanderthal society may have been organized in such a way that women moved to men's families. Laura Cassidy, from Trinity College Dublin, Ireland, says the new finding is important because it's the first time concurrent living Neanderthals have been sequenced together. That is really exciting because what we have is a community, and we can start to understand a bit about how these communities worked, she says. Cassidy, who was not involved in this study, warns that the results are limited by the small number of Neanderthals sampled. For example, it is not possible to say whether women moved between all Neanderthal groups or whether this was something unique to this clan. And she would like to know more about what connects the other people in the cave. Humans, for example, form social groups of unrelated friends and companions. We seem to be able to put ourselves together in all sorts of configurations, she says. It would be nice to know if Neanderthals were as flexible. The genetic data isn't good enough to determine if everyone in the cave is distantly related, by marriage, or just friends. Skov says he's still working on getting a clearer picture. There is one more mystery. Skov says there's no definitive evidence, but he suspects starvation may have played a role. Life back then was rough, they survived by hunting bison, he says. You can imagine if, in 1 year, they don't manage to hunt and catch all they need, something sad like that. These Neanderthals were probably some of the last of their kind. This is just about 10,000 years before Neanderthals go extinct, says Skov. there's very few left. But he says Neanderthals haven't completely disappeared. On average, non-African people contain about 2% Neanderthal DNA. In other words, at least sometimes it seems that humans and Neanderthals found each other and built communities together.